What if I told you that the feminist movement wasn't actually designed to liberate women, but to double the workforce and cut wages in half while making women think they were winning? What if the entire women's liberation movement was actually one of the most successful corporate psyops in human history? Today we're going to break down exactly how feminism went from fighting for basic rights to becoming a tool that destroyed the nuclear family, crushed male wages, and left modern women more miserable than their grandmothers ever were.
How feminism messed up the US economy and how it's actually now come back to bite modern women in the butt. Let's rewind. The modern feminist movement kicked off in the 1960s. The goal was fair wages, equal opportunities, and legal protections. Great, right? They told us that the first wave gave us the right to vote, and the second wave brought us into the workforce. Here's where it gets a little bit sticky. During the second wave, the message shifted. It wasn't just, you can work outside the home. It became, you should. Or you must if you want to be respected. Doing nothing but staying home and cooking and cleaning and raising children, that was suddenly less than. So women flooded the workforce around this time. They were told they would get more financial freedom, more independence, and of course, more respect.
This shift is the key to understanding the entire scam. Notice how quickly the messaging changed from, you have the option to work, to, you're worthless if you don't work. This wasn't organic, this was deliberate social engineering. Corporate America realized they had a massive untapped labor force sitting at home, and they needed a way to get them into the workforce without looking exploitative. So they weaponized women's desire for respect and dignity, convincing them that traditional feminine roles were inherently degrading. The genius of this manipulation is that they made women believe they were fighting for liberation while actually volunteering for economic exploitation. They turned motherhood and homemaking, roles that had been honored for thousands of years, into symbols of oppression overnight.
But when millions of women started working full-time, it didn't just change individual families, it changed the entire economy. Suddenly, two incomes weren't just nice, they were expected, and that's where we get into the two-income trap. This is a book written by Elizabeth Warren, who is not exactly a conservative voice, but she actually articulates the situation beautifully in her book, The Two-Income Trap. She argues that when both parents started working, the cost of living adjusted.
This is where the economic reality becomes undeniable. When you double the workforce overnight, you don't double the opportunities, you have the value of labor. It's basic supply and demand. In the 1950s, a man working at a factory could support a wife, 3 kids, buy a house, and have money left over for vacations. That wasn't because men were paid more than they deserved, it's because their labor was scarce and valuable. When women entered the workforce en masse, employers suddenly had twice as many people competing for the same jobs. Wages didn't need to keep up with cost of living anymore because households had 2 earners. The result? What used to require 1 income now requires 2, and families are actually poorer despite working twice as hard. This is the most successful wage suppression scheme in human history, and women were convinced to celebrate it as progress.
Good school districts, prices went up. Childcare, through the roof. Everything from health insurance to groceries inflated to match dual income spending power. So now we've created this world where it takes 2 full-time incomes to just be able to afford the same lifestyle 1 income covered in.
A median home in 1960 cost about 2.3 times the median household income. Today, that same ratio is over 5 times median household income, and that's with 2 people working instead of 1. College tuition has increased over 1,000% since the 1960s when adjusted for inflation. Healthcare costs have exploded. Childcare now costs more than most people's mortgages. All of these price increases happened specifically because the market knew families had 2 incomes to spend. Businesses didn't absorb the extra labor cost, they passed it on to consumers who now had double the earning power. Women were told they were gaining financial independence, but what actually happened is that the entire economy restructured itself to capture both incomes instead of 1.
1960. Feminism told women and even sold them the idea that they were breaking free. But for a lot of women, especially moms, it feels more like a trap. Because now the choice to stay home with your kids isn't even on the table for many families. So many women would love to be able to be homemakers and clean the house and cook and take care of their kids, and they can't. Because what used to be a respected and even honored role of homemaker, caregiver, mother got dismissed.
This is perhaps the cruelest aspect of the entire feminism scam. They didn't just convince women to enter the workforce, they systematically destroyed the social value of everything women had traditionally excelled at. Raising children, managing a household, creating a nurturing environment, these became viewed as unpaid labor that any idiot could do. The irony is that modern feminists constantly talk about how childcare is expensive and difficult, but somehow when mothers do it for their own children, it's worthless. They convinced women it was meaningless drudgery. Now we have women spending 40 hours a week in corporate cubicles doing make-work jobs they hate, then paying other people to raise their children, and wondering why they feel empty and unfulfilled.
Feminism lied to us and told us that success only looked like climbing the corporate ladder and competing with men. But we traded in something priceless: time with our children, peace in our own homes, and even financial flexibility. So while women were told you should do it all, what we ended up with is exhaustion, rising debt, and a system that only works if you're always working outside your house. The very movement that claimed to be liberating women made it nearly impossible to live on one income. And I'm sorry, but that is not empowering. Turns out that there's a real price to pay when a society stops valuing motherhood. When caregiving is treated as invisible labor and homemakers are seen as less than, everybody actually loses, especially women. Not just emotionally or in the family structure, we could talk about that forever, but economically as well. So no, I'm sorry, feminism didn't save women. It told us we need to do it all, and now our generation is paying the price for it.
Feminism was never really about helping women. It was the most successful psychological operation in modern history, designed to destroy the nuclear family, suppress wages, and create a massive dependent class that would be permanently reliant on both corporate employment and government programs. To understand who really benefited from the feminist movement, you need to look at the timeline and follow the money. The second wave feminist movement didn't emerge organically from women's dissatisfaction. It was carefully engineered and funded by the same corporate and government interests that would ultimately benefit from its success. The Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, and other elite institutions poured millions into feminist organizations throughout the 1960s and 70s. Why would the wealthiest capitalists in America fund a movement that was supposedly about overthrowing patriarchal capitalism? Because they knew exactly what the real outcome would be. The Rockefeller family didn't fund feminism because they cared about women's rights. They funded it because David Rockefeller himself admitted that getting women into the workforce would allow them to tax the other half of the population that had previously been outside the formal economy. Before feminism, a housewife's labor was invisible to the tax system. She created value through cooking, cleaning, childcare, and home management, but none of that showed up in GDP calculations or generated tax revenue. The moment women entered the formal workforce, that same labor became taxable economic activity. But here's the deeper manipulation. They didn't just want to tax women's labor, they wanted to destroy the family's economic independence. A strong nuclear family with a male breadwinner and female homemaker was essentially a small economic unit that was largely self-sufficient. They grew their own food, made their own clothes, educated their own children, and took care of their own elderly. This kind of family didn't need to consume much from the corporate economy and didn't depend on government services. The feminist movement systematically dismantled this independence. They convinced women that cooking was drudgery, so families started buying processed foods and eating at restaurants. They convinced women that childcare was unfulfilling, so families started paying for daycare and after-school programs. They convinced women that managing a household was meaningless, so families started outsourcing cleaning, laundry, and home maintenance. Every single traditional feminine skill was reframed as oppressive labor that should be handed over to market professionals. The result was the complete commodification of family life. Everything that families used to do for themselves became a product or service they had to purchase. This created massive new markets and turned families from producers into pure consumers. Instead of one income supporting a self-sufficient family unit, you now needed two incomes to purchase all the services that had previously been provided within the family. But the psychological operation went even deeper. They didn't just destroy women's economic role, they destroyed their social and spiritual identity. For thousands of years, women derived meaning and status from their roles as wives, mothers, and community builders. These roles were respected because they were essential to social stability and cultural transmission. Feminism systematically attacked the value of these roles, convincing women that they were worthless unless they were competing directly with men in male-dominated spaces. This created a generation of women who were alienated from their own biology and psychology. Women are biologically programmed to prioritize relationships, nurturing, and social cohesion. Men are biologically programmed to prioritize competition, achievement, and resource acquisition. These aren't social constructs, they're fundamental differences that exist across all cultures and throughout history. But feminism convinced women that these natural inclinations were the result of patriarchal conditioning. The psychological damage from this lie is immeasurable. You have women trying to suppress their maternal instincts to climb corporate ladders, then wondering why they feel empty and unfulfilled when they reach the top. You have women postponing marriage and childbearing for career advancement, then facing fertility problems and relationship difficulties when they finally decide they want families. You have women competing in environments designed around male psychology, then burning out from the stress of trying to be something they're not. Meanwhile, the destruction of traditional masculinity was equally deliberate. Strong, independent men who could support families were a threat to the new economic order. If men could earn enough to support wives and children, women might choose to stay home instead of joining the workforce. So the same system that pushed women into careers systematically undermined men's ability to fill the traditional breadwinner role. They shipped manufacturing jobs overseas, flooded entry-level positions with immigrant labor, and created credentialism requirements that favored female-dominated educational approaches. They established diversity quotas and affirmative action programs that explicitly discriminated against men in hiring and promotion. They criminalized normal masculine behavior through sexual harassment policies and toxic masculinity campaigns. The result is that most men today cannot realistically support a family on a single income, even if they wanted to. This forces women into the workforce regardless of their personal preferences, completing the trap. Women can't choose to be homemakers because their husbands can't afford to support them, and men can't fulfill the provider role because the economic system has been restructured to prevent it. But here's where it gets really insidious. The same elites who created this problem then offered themselves as the solution. Can't afford childcare? The government will provide subsidized daycare. Can't find time to cook? The food industry will provide convenient processed meals. Can't manage work-life balance? The therapy industry will help you cope with the stress. Struggling with fertility because you waited too long to have children? The medical industry will provide expensive fertility treatments. Every problem created by the destruction of traditional family structures became a new market opportunity. The more dysfunctional families became, the more services they needed to purchase to replace what they used to provide for themselves. The more isolated and anxious people became, the more they depended on consumer products and professional services to fill the void. The feminist movement also served crucial political purposes for the ruling class. Strong families are the foundation of stable communities, and stable communities are harder to control than atomized individuals. When you destroy the family unit, you destroy the primary source of social support, cultural transmission, and political resistance. Isolated individuals are much more likely to depend on government programs and corporate employment for survival. Additionally, the feminist movement created a permanent divide-and-conquer dynamic between men and women. Instead of seeing themselves as partners with complementary roles working toward shared goals, men and women were taught to see themselves as competitors in a zero-sum battle for resources and status. This prevents them from uniting against the actual sources of their economic and social problems. The abortion issue is particularly revealing in this context. The feminist movement framed abortion as essential to women's liberation, but who actually benefits from widespread abortion? Not women, who often suffer psychological trauma from the procedure. Not men, who lose any say in whether their children live or die. Not society, which loses future productive members and taxpayers. The primary beneficiaries of legal abortion are employers who don't want to deal with pregnant employees, and corporations that don't want workers taking time off for family responsibilities. Abortion allows the economic system to treat women exactly like men, as interchangeable economic units with no special biological needs or social roles. It's the ultimate commodification of human reproduction. The sexual revolution that accompanied feminism served similar purposes. Traditional sexual morality was designed to channel sexual energy into stable, productive family formation. The sexual revolution broke down these constraints, creating a culture of casual sex and delayed marriage that served corporate interests perfectly. Young people focused on sexual experimentation and career building instead of marriage and family formation, maximizing their years as productive workers and consumers. Meanwhile, the breakdown of sexual norms created massive new markets for contraception, sexually transmitted disease treatment, fertility assistance, dating apps, and mental health services to deal with the psychological consequences of unstable relationships. Every aspect of human sexuality became commodified and medicalized. The transgender movement represents the logical endpoint of feminist ideology, the complete denial of biological reality in favor of social construction. If gender is entirely a social construct, then there's no reason women need different accommodations than men, no reason pregnancy should affect career advancement, and no reason families need to be organized around biological realities. It's the ultimate victory of corporate interests over human nature. The saddest part is how successful this psychological operation has been. Most women today genuinely believe that feminism liberated them, even as they struggle with higher rates of depression, anxiety, and life dissatisfaction than any previous generation. They've been convinced that their biological instincts are oppressive, their traditional roles are worthless, and their happiness depends on competing with men in environments designed to exploit them. They look at their grandmothers, who had large families, stable marriages, and strong community connections, and they see oppression. They look at their own lives, working 60-hour weeks in corporate jobs they hate, struggling to afford childcare, dealing with fertility problems from delayed childbearing, and wondering why they feel so empty despite all their achievements, and they see liberation. The truly diabolical aspect of this whole operation is that it was sold as empowerment while actually creating unprecedented dependence. Traditional women had real power within their spheres. They controlled household finances, made major family decisions, and wielded significant social influence through their roles as wives and mothers. Modern women have been convinced to give up this real power in exchange for the illusion of equality in male-dominated institutions where they will always be at a disadvantage. The feminist movement didn't liberate women, it turned them into wage slaves while convincing them they should be grateful for the opportunity. It destroyed their connection to their own biology, psychology, and social purpose while telling them they were breaking free from oppression. It created a system where women have to work twice as hard to achieve half the life satisfaction their grandmothers enjoyed naturally. And the most tragic part is that most women are so psychologically invested in the feminist narrative that they can't admit they've been scammed. To acknowledge that traditional gender roles might have actually served their interests better would require admitting that everything they've been taught about progress and liberation was a lie. So they double down on the dysfunction, demanding even more equality to solve problems that were created by the pursuit of equality in the first place. The feminist movement was the greatest scam in human history. Women were promised liberation and delivered into slavery. They were promised independence and made permanently dependent. They were promised fulfillment and given emptiness. And they were convinced to celebrate every step of their own destruction as progress. Now we're going to continue spiraling into social dysfunction, economic collapse, and demographic decline. The feminist revolution wasn't a liberation, it was a conquest. And the conquerors weren't men, they were the corporate and government elites who turned human nature itself into a commodity.